Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Janell Blue, president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society and also a sponsor of this program. Today our guest is Carol Campbell. And Carol is a member of our organization and also has some very interesting research to talk about today. And before we get started, let's just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, good morning, Janelle. Thank you for having me today. I now live in Alexandria, Virginia, but I was raised in the Northwest. My dad was an Air Force hydraulic mechanic, and my mom was an educator. She taught first grade, kindergarten, 25 years.
Wow.
I also put in a plug that she was Washington State Teacher of the Year,
Whoa.
1982. And I came out to Virginia through my career. I've had a 35-year career civil service, and when I retired here in the DC area, I noticed that history was all around us. I've always had a love for history and photography, so it was the perfect place for me to land and now start doing what I wanted to do versus what I had to do to pay the bills.
Understand.
So retirement is fun.
So how did you get in? So how did your history, love of history and a little extra time now that you're retired, how did you get into genealogy?
Well, I got an invite in 2014 to some family reunions. And growing up, I always knew that my parents were from Alabama and Texas, but that's about all I knew. Well, when I got the invite to the reunions, I started looking at, well, who are my relatives? Who are my people? And that's what started it.
You know, I just want to ask, how did you happen to get on the list to be able, I mean, how did they know about you to invite you for this reunion? It sounds like you didn't really know those people very well.
We didn't grow up with relatives. Now that I'm in contact with my cousins, aunts, and uncles, you know, their stories are, oh, we went to grandma's for the summer, or the cousin lives down the street. Well, being up in the Northwest and then being in the South, we didn't have a lot of contact. In doing the history, I'm not sure if that's purposeful or if it just happened that way. Because a lot of the people that migrated out of the South wanted something better for their children. And my dad being in the Air Force, going to the Northwest, totally different environment. My parents growing up in segregated communities. I grew up on military bases where it was always a combination of everybody, anybody. Kind of a community in and of itself. So as far as getting on the list, one of the White Mock family has an excellent annual that they put out from their reunions.
Oh my gosh.
And that's where it, this is the 2014, 2016 is where I first came in. They have an organization, they have officers, they got scholarships and everything, and they do the family tree.
How many people are we talking about?
I don't know the number of people, but in my database right now, it's a little distorted because I'm doing my family, my husband's family. I have over 600 people in my database.
Wow.
And starting with my parents, my husband's parents, their parents, and going back. My current family tree for the White family, I go back 7 generations. So with Madison, the person that we are going to talk about, he is the top of the tree, and we go all the way down to my nephew's son.
So let's start with Madison.
Okay.
We may run out of time with 7 generations.
Yeah. Madison, he was born a slave. I have a document that when he was applying for his disability, he had to give proof of his birth. Well, a lot of African Americans did not have birth certificates. There's another letter that's in there. They didn't have birth certificates, so when he applied, he had to depose when he was born, where he was born. And the letter that I've come across says that his parents told him that he was born a slave in 1845.
Did he write the letter?
No. What's interesting is in all of his correspondence, you will see a signature for Madison White, his mark.
Okay.
X.
Yeah.
There's a lot of X's because some of them could not read and write.
So it was, but he told whoever the
Right.
yeah, okay,
Right.
so it was
They were told
his
that
words.
it was his words that he was born in 1845. And that's what started his official birth record in the documents that I've been able to find.
And where did you find that document?
A lot of the documents are from Ancestry, but it's also from the federal census and probate records. And
Probate records are wonderful, aren't they?
wonderful. I'll tell you a story about that later on. Again, my time period right now is from 1845 up to 2021. And so all the things in between. And that
Wow.
goes back to my love of history. I try to look at a timeline of American history. Where has my family had an impact? Where have I had an impact? What have I witnessed? What have they witnessed? All the way from the Civil War to Captain Kirk going into space.
Last week.
Last week. But Madison, born a slave, there were little communities in Alabama, in Lowndes County, Alabama. When you're doing your research, you find that the counties have shifted over time.
Yes.
And so you have to go look in the surrounding. You also, when you look at the census, have to take a look at people that are on that page, forward and backward, to find out, well, I might not find this person, but I might find a relative, and then that relative might lead you to something else.
The fan club, they call it.
Yeah, yeah.
Friends, associates, and something else.
I've
Neighbors.
found mother-in-law, which would be my grandmother, on one register. I found brother-in-law living with his sister in Birmingham. But again, each clue takes you to different spots, lots of rabbit holes.
But when they were slaves, weren't there some shortcomings in those registers? For instance, I mean, a lot of times slaves weren't assigned surnames or didn't use surnames.
Right.
And so that's hard when you're going to a census that only has a name.
It's hard. I've gone to 1850, and I believe the other tricky thing about the census records are there's federal records and there's state records. And sometimes Ancestry does not tell you whether it's the federal or the state.
Okay.
And so I've for Madison, Lowndes County, Alabama, I'm having to search through Alabama and the federal census. In the census, you will find some that have the slave register for freed African Americans, and then you'd have just the regular register. I have been able to find that Madison White was owned by a gentleman called Joseph A. White.
Okay.
We refer to them as slave owners,
Right.
but when you're doing genealogy, a lot of times you'll find them categorized as planters
Right.
because it was planting the plantation
Right.
crops.
Right.
So
Right.
interesting, on trying to find Madison's trail, I've had to look several different ways. I've gone to Joseph A. White's ancestry because him being the plantation owner would have more documentation. I'm still trying to get to his slave roster and his plantation records, because in the plantation records they will show you what they planted, where they planted, and I believe in the 1850 census I have found Madison as an 8-year-old boy, but it's only first names and
Right.
ages,
Right.
not year of birth and all the other intricate
But
information.
it just sort of fits.
It
the age.
fits.
Yeah.
You have to cross-reference the documents that you do find. I go back to the family reunion booklet, and I was so interested to see, okay, who's my relatives? Where am I at? I know my daddy's name. And I found it, and I said, but that's not his birthday. And then I thought, well, people do pass on same family names down the line.
Right.
So I was able to find out that this Willie James White is my dad's cousin, not my dad. And then the other interesting thing was, coming back to the family tree, Madison was married twice. His second wife in their tree is what's in this family booklet. My great-great-grandmother died, and it's because the second wife had the pension file. That is how the tree line got passed down. So I'm still trying to find out what happened to Bernice, Madison's first wife, which is my branch of the tree.
You know, I think that's a really important point to make for genealogists or people who are doing research. Be careful about the wives. Don't take it for granted that you are from one or the other wife. That's really, really important, and people do get mixed up with that.
Right. Also, trying to find her family. In those days, families were really close, and they were all in the surrounding area. So you might have the same last surname, but not the same family, which I'm running into on my dad's grandmother's side, Peterson. Peterson was the family name. Cooper Peterson, around the 1840s, was the top of that tree, and down the line at the other end, like in the 40s, another Peterson gets married, but it's not that same lineage. So,
well, you know, and along those same lines, when you think about Madison perhaps he took the surname of the planter. But what's to say that other slaves who came from that plantation, maybe they did the same thing? So you can't assume that everybody who has the last name of White
is
from
related.
Alabama, from that plantation, is related.
The interesting thing about Joseph White, and I'm trying to find out, he came from North Carolina, and then when they were giving out land, he bought the land in Alabama. And so as far as birthplaces, always known, records show that it's Alabama, it's Alabama. I've found some that now are starting to say Kentucky and Virginia. Love of history, again, when were the states created?
Good point.
In 1845, was Alabama a state or was it a territory? When did Georgia come into play? That also muddies the water as far as trying to figure out, what do I really have here?
Oh, that's a good point.
Another thing about geography and locations, back in the 1800s, we didn't really have zip codes, right?
No, we didn't.
But things were tied to the post office.
Right.
So post office were named after prominent people in the community. And so that's another path that I'm going down to try to find out where perhaps Madison is buried. Because he died in a place called Benton, Alabama, which was tied to the Jelks post office, but neither of those two still now exist. So we have to go and find out what happened.
And there are good records on post offices.
Yeah, I've got that going.
Well, let's talk a bit about Madison, because he joined one of the color troop regiments, right?
Right.
Which is, so there's always the question of, how does a slave do that?
Well, what I've learned is that when Lincoln made it legit for the African Americans to join, they joined with the promise of freedom after service.
Right.
And so, again, some of my relatives, I'm finding them on the 1867 voter rolls in Alabama, 18, 19-year-olds. You figure 18, 19, put yourself in that place. Again, going back to that timeline, you've just seen the Civil War, you've seen the beginning of Reconstruction, you've seen the hope of freedom.
Right.
So let's vote. And then again, in today's timeline, we've got voter suppression.
Right.
Same issue, different time.
Yeah.
As far as the historical trail.
But in the very beginning, right after the war, it was hopeful, and people were able to do it for a short time until Jim Crow came in.
Right.
Yeah.
But Madison served 1865, which is after the official end of the war.
Yeah.
But as the federal troops were laying the land for Reconstruction, they needed people to do what you do when you close down operations. What we've got on the screen is actually a copy of a certificate that the Washington, D.C. African American Civil War Museum provides to descendants of the U.S. colored troops members.
Now, where is that museum? It's not the new African American Museum.
No.
It's different.
It's different. It's on the subway, and it's at the African American Civil War stop.
Okay, well, there you
Yeah,
go.
right across the street. African American Museum is there, and they have a roster of all U.S. colored troops and members. And if you
Okay.
come in and you give lineage to one of those, they will provide you with this certificate. I didn't know that when the family reunion was here. I found out about it later. But the interesting thing is, each of the units in the memorial that's right off the subway has a plaque that provides the names of all the members. And I was able to find Madison's name on the wall, up here. On the screen, I've highlighted where his name is.
Great.
He was with the 136th Infantry, U.S. Colored Troops, Company B.
So, so that unit really didn't get started until, as you said, it was sort of towards the end of at least the beginning of the end of the war. And so why would he, well, he would join because he was promised freedom, right? And also, but I mean, how did he get off of the plantation? I guess at that point, planters were already knew that this was, maybe they helped them get off? I don't know. How did that happen?
I'm not certain. I'm still in the phase of just getting some facts to then start pulling the story together. But a lot of information about Madison can be found in the National Archives pension records.
Aha, tell us about those.
Okay, the National Archives, and there's also a genealogy database called Fold 3, which has military information. But I went down to the archives, I believe in 2013, 14, and pulled his records. It's amazing that I was able to physically touch these documents. Original records. And it was over 150 pages of documents.
Goodness.
His particular file included both his military file and the pension file. The military file, which is amazing, at 62, he decided to claim disability. He claimed that he had rheumatoid arthritis and problems from pneumonia when he was walking guard in the military. I can't find where he was walking guard. That's another piece of information I need to find out. But he was denied the benefits probably 6, 7, 8 times, and then it finally went through. This is in 1907. He passed away in 1908, just a year later. However, his wife, second wife, Bernice, was able to obtain a pension. She had 4 surviving children from him, so she got $12 a month to raise the family.
It's something. In those days, $12 went a little further than it does today.
It did. I do have calculators where I can do present day value of earnings, which helps because also when you go back to the census records and you see whether they rented or owned, what was the value of their property, you can calculate that forward.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but in the archive files, you will find depositions. You had to prove that you were not remarried and that the children were yours. And there's about 10 or 12 different depositions in Madison's file. And one of the cute stories is one of the neighbors had to vouch that the children were all Bernice's.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there were no birth certificates in those days.
However, Bernice says that she wrote down the names and birth dates in the Bible.
In the family Bible.
That it was sent to D.C. And I'm saying, I don't know that that's true. Or where would you send a Bible? Or maybe you'd send a copy of what was in the Bible to D.C.
That's probably.
Okay. But the children were all listed there. And there was a child by the name of Nora. And on the deposition, they're typing up what was said. And they said, and the deposee says, you know, there's a book in the Bible. Remember, there's that boat, that ark. Who was on that ark? And it says Noah. Yeah, that's the name. That's the name. So when they say Noah, I have to take it to the Southern accent maybe, because it's definitely Nora. And it turns out that Nora is a guy, not a girl. So more clues on what's going on. A couple other the starting points. The depositions start out, I was 10 years old when the Yankees came to town.
Wow.
You know,
Isn't it fun to read those things, though? It's just like...
Yeah, but the National Archives has a wealth of information. If you can get a hold of the military soldiers' pension file and military record, for those that don't have family records that are passed down, that can get you started. And that's what got me started on Madison. And like I say, I'm going to try to take it from 7 generations to leave a gift to my nieces and nephews so that they don't have to start from the beginning.
Wow.
They can start and go down.
So are you planning on putting it in a book?
It'll put in a book. I've been watching Lewis Gates in his stories.
Yeah.
And so I'm collecting the photo albums so that I can turn the page when I tell the story to my relatives. Hopefully within the next year or two, I'll have this pulled together.
Now, for the reunion, because I'm planning a family reunion, and I was, is there an opportunity for you to share your research at the reunion? Will they have, like, with that many people, I guess you'd have maybe just different areas set up where somebody could come and talk about it?
We usually have workshops. And then also at the banquet dinner, if anybody wants to get up and give a small snippet on their family and things, we do it there. But again, we put them on CDs or digital form so that people can have a copy afterwards.
So everybody can have a copy.
Yeah. The one thing with the research is you must be sensitive to the person, especially those that are living. If you have a relative that's got 5 marriages and she doesn't want the rest of the world to know, or if you have that lost uncle that's been in jail for 20 years,
right.
There's stuff that you do have to be sensitive, and I ask permission before I put things down officially on a tree. If nothing else, it will just be from my siblings back, because most of the older relatives have passed on.
Right.
But anything that anybody's living,
yes,
you do need to check with them before you put something publicly.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Also, adoption as well. I've run into that situation where somebody puts that on there, and that's genealogically correct, but it can be sensitive.
Yeah.
And so
I always say that I'm not going to tell somebody else's story if they're around to tell it. I can only tell my story, and I'm pretty safe going backwards.
Yeah.
But going forward, that has to be coordinated with that other person. If you have family disputes and you might have disowned the relative, or they might have disowned you, and they want no part of the tree, well, okay. It'll come out. Yeah, eventually.
Eventually, especially with DNA now, the secrets are getting told many times,
Right.
And so, well, in the time we have left, what about your other ancestors? Now that was your dad, Madison White.
Madison White's on my dad's side. My dad's mother side is the Peterson family, and I found a couple snippets there back in the 1800s where Cooper Peterson, him and his 2 sons were actually hired out on a contract. So
you found that?
I found it.
You found the document.
Yep. And I'm working through the Alabama State Archives, and they had done a training session on labor contracts, and I just happened to be down there and found this, and there were 6 documents. Of the 6, mine was the only one that did not have the handwritten original document. It took me a year. It took me a year working with the research tech, and he just sent it to me this February. So I've got that, and it highlights some more information.
So he was a slave when he was hired out? That happened a lot, didn't it?
Yeah, because a lot of what I'm finding also is when the men went to the war and the wives were left running the plantations, the crops might not have been doing well, and they needed money. So a source of income was to hire the slaves out, either send them to town to work their crafts or send them to another plantation, because economically, hey, why should I be running a plantation when it's not giving me my benefit?
Yeah.
And I still have to clothe and feed the workers, So let me farm them out and get some income and come back. The people were in this contract. It said that Cooper could keep the 250, but if they didn't work every day, they'd be docked. And if they had medical needs or spent more for their subsistence, that would be docked. So how much of that 250 he got, who knows?
But that was a way that some slaves were able to accumulate some money because they were paid a smidgen of whatever the planter got back.
Right.
But they could, if they saved it over time, they could actually buy their, perhaps buy their freedom.
A lot of times it was always a negative balance. You get into sharecropping.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you also get into some of the violence. When you send the slave into town to work next to the white or the immigrant, a thought might be, you're taking work away from me.
Right.
But he may be better at the craft, but you know, society and how things work. So again, going back to history and researching and getting information, it'll tell a story, but it's going to take time to go through all the different sources that are out there.
Yeah. Well, being a native Texan, I'm interested in your Texas ancestor. We have just a minute, less than a minute.
Texas, I'm just now getting into the grandparents. My great-grandfather's name was Arkansas Freeman. And we always said Arkansas Freeman. And then when you look at it, you say, wait a minute, that's Arkansas.
That's Arkansas. Well, there is an Arkansas, Texas, I think, or something. So it's probably right on that border area somewhere.
But didn't know a lot about him. Knew my grandfather, but not the great-grandfather. And so again, that's more research that has to be done. The one thing that I did find is that the one set of grandparents owned property, but they sold it. And I went to the deed in the county, and fortunately, they had listed all 11 kids and their spouses' married names.
Oh my gosh.
But the property was sold. The story is, property was sold, and then they found oil on it after it was sold.
Oh, wow. So. And with that, we're going to have to sign off. But thanks so much, Carol. This is so interesting. And once again, I want to invite everybody to the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society. You see the email address on there, the website, and we would love for you to join us as a guest, or by all means, become a member. So thanks again. It was fun.
Thank you.